Today's episode of the Counselling Tutor Podcast is sponsored by Web Healer. You're a counsellor in private practice and you need a website, or you've got an existing website which you need help with. Web Healer are offering Counselling Tutor Podcast listeners, that's you, £100 off the cost of a website design and build. Now, Web Healers specialise in websites for counsellors and psychotherapists. It's what they do. And the Web Healer team provide a completely non-technical, done-for-you solution, leaving you to focus your time on your clients. Operating for 20 years, Web Healer are a trusted resource amongst counsellors when it comes to getting your practice online. So get the package details and claim your £100 off coupon for your new website by going to counsellingtutor.com/website. That's counsellingtutor.com/website.
Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hi, I'm Rory, and with me, as always, yes, indeed, is Ken. How are you doing, Ken?
I'm exceptionally well, thank you, Rory, and we're very grateful that you've joined us for episode 249 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. If you're listening in real time, it's a brand new year. New episode, new year, and a slightly different format as well. We like to change things up, keep things fresh. We've got 3 topics we're going to be covering today, starting off with a firm favourite, and that's theory and practice, where we take a little bit of theory and we look at how that presents in practice. And today we're going to be looking at Elisabeth Kübler-Ross's stages of grieving and how that might show up in therapy. We then go into a brand new section that Rory has designed for us. It's called Practice Today. And within Practice Today, we're going to be looking at contemporary developments, challenges within counselling. What are you facing right now? What are you talking about? And of course, to suggest topics for that, make sure you suggest those in our Facebook group. We'll tell you the information on that in a moment. And then into Practice Matters. Can't have a Counselling Tutor podcast without Practice Matters, where we take an element of what we may see in practice and learn a little bit about it. It's our CPD section. And today we have Allan Frater speaking about waking dreams. Interesting topic. Looking forward to that. Well, let's kick off this new year, this new season of the Counselling Tutor Podcast, episode 249, Rory, by checking in with theory and practice, and of course the DABDA model of Elisabeth Kübler-Ross. How does that present that theory in our practice rooms?
Well, I think before I go on to analyse that, I think I'd like to say it's one of the most enduring pieces of theory that is around not only the counselling profession, but also the helping professions in general. I think that anybody who's a helper, be they a therapist, a support worker, anybody who helps people in any way has probably come across the work of Elisabeth Kübler-Ross, a Swiss-American psychiatrist who has a really interesting backstory. She was a cleaner, and then she met someone who helped her become a psychiatrist, which I think is a fantastic story. And she developed, through her observations of people who were dying, in the process of dying, people had terminal illnesses, how they reacted. And one of the very interesting things about this is she didn't actually research them as stuff. They weren't research participants. It was more observational, and more she would talk to them, and she saw some patterns of behaviour, and she called this the grieving process. And she wrote a book in 1969 called On Death and Dying, and from that book we get the acronym DABDA, and it said that people go through in terms of loss, a kind of pattern of experiencing, and that is denial. So DABDA is denial, anger, bargaining, and depression. And the model would suggest on face value that people go through this in an order. People first of all deny there's anything wrong, and then once that's kind of resolved and they realise there is something wrong, they become angry about it. And then They're bargaining. This third stage is all about, if I do this, if I do that, will things change? And then depression, the realization that, life is ending. And then eventually acceptance. And I think sometimes this model gets a bit misrepresented, Ken, because it's always presented in a linear format. In other words, it starts with denial and finishes with acceptance. The truth of the matter is that many, many people who experience grief may have those presenting issues, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance, in different orders or all together, or miss some of them out. But it is a very useful kind of theory to gain an understanding of how people may react to something as tragic as terminal illness.
Yeah, a good topic that you've brought in. I love this little piece of theory, Rory. And what's interesting, of course, this was written in regards to that terminal illness, but it is so adaptable to the grieving process as a whole. So it can be the loss of somebody else. It can be the loss of a pet. That's the thing. We can see even the loss of something like a car. We might see this process playing out. So there's something very human about the different stages that were identified here that we do go through. And I think really smart pointing out, Rory, is that you're not sat there with this number line saying, right, so they're in denial now, so next time I see them, then we're going to see the anger, then we're going to go into the old bargaining stage. It can, as you say, you can have two or more of them at the same time in a way, or miss things out, and they don't necessarily run in an order, but they are something to kind of peg where somebody might be at and to understand it from a human perspective. And I'm going to start with that first, the denial, and I'm going to use a car, the well-loved car that is parked downstairs, and then you get up the next morning and you go downstairs and you look and the car's gone, Rory.
Oh,
and
gosh.
the denial is, where did I park it? It can't be gone. Yeah. I know I locked it, so it can't be gone. Has somebody else used it? Did I park it in a different place? Am I remembering correctly here? And there's this, I can't believe it element to it within that moment. Then the person might go on to the bargaining and go, well, I can now truly see it's gone because I can see some broken glass where my parking spot was. Now, I wonder if I'd have only bought that steering lock. My wife was on at me for how many years to get that steering lock? Oh, I should have put that alarm in. If I'd have put that alarm in, that wouldn't have happened. And that's into the bargaining stage. And that is retrospective bargaining, where you're going into the past saying, if I'd have done things differently then, maybe this wouldn't have happened right now. And then, of course, the depression, my car's gone. What am I going to do? I can't live without my car. I don't know how I'm going to get around. But of course, life goes on and we live on and we make our way through that. And then the acceptance that one day you sat in a pub, Rory, telling somebody the story about the day that your car got stolen. And you're maybe removed from the spikiness of the emotions that you felt within that moment. I've taken a very glib example, not related to people and rather put it on a car, but that's kind of maybe an overview of that DABDA model playing out.
Yeah, absolutely, Ken. And I think you've hit on an interesting point there. One of the reasons DABDA is presented in the way it is, in a linear form, is because it's probably the easiest theory of loss that can be taught to a wide range of professionals. In fact, if you drill down into the work of Kübler-Ross, and bearing in mind, she was a proper researcher. The person who wrote the foreword to a book was Colin Murray Parkes, who was who is a huge influence in studies of loss and grief. So, this wasn't just a very short book that said DABDA and then at the end had some references in.
Yeah.
There was a lot to it. And also, I think it's worth pointing out that her observations were for people who were dying. So sometimes that model doesn't transpose to people who have lost people.
Yes.
I think that's something that needs to be said, and it has been adapted through the years. her work has been adapted and modified, rather like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's been adapted. And in fact, if you go to our mother website, counsellingtutor.com, look for podcast episode 249. We'll put a link to Elisabeth Kübler-Ross's, the late Elisabeth Kübler-Ross's website, and you can see how it's been adapted. But it remains, Ken, an enduring theory of how to work with grief and loss. And I think it's one that can be taught quite quickly. For those people who've never encountered how to work with clients, just to have that little acronym in the back of your mind, I think is really helpful.
Yeah. And for me, there's also a normalizing element in these stages. And I'm going to go back to what I was saying, how if there's anything that stands out in these stages is how human they are, and how these kind of feelings or emotions show themselves in different stages of our lives. And sometimes, and when I speak about normalizing, sometimes you may be working with a client who has lost somebody very dear to themselves. It could be a partner or somebody really close, and they lose that person. And they might come into therapy and they might be quite angry that person is no longer around. Now, they love that person dearly. They're experiencing such grief at the loss of that person. But within them, there's also this, how can he leave me now? How could he go now? And that for that client presenting, and this is what this is about, how does that theory represent itself in practice? It can be hard for them. That can be unacceptable to them. How can I feel this anger towards this person that I've just lost and that I loved so much? And we can go to the normalizing, where we can explain that this is natural. This is a natural experience to be having when faced with a loss like this, and it can normalize that and maybe give that person a little bit of resolve that it's okay to feel that anger intermingled in with all of that grief and sadness.
Absolutely, Ken. And I think that, we talk about psychological education a lot, and people see that in the frame of trauma, which of course, grief is a form of trauma. But I think sometimes just to maybe step out of the person-centered pantheon of non-directedness and just share that information. I've always been a great believer in information that is going to be helpful to the client. We should share, as long as there's no agenda to it. And, many times I've shared that in practice and said, and sometimes you're right, clients will say, why do I feel this way? Why do I hate this person so much for leaving me? And that brings up anxiety and fear and shame and all those emotions that are attached to it. And just simply saying, well, look, this is a process that humans go through. It's been known for a long, long time. And, not to put too fine a point on it, look, you're not going crazy. This is just a natural progression of grief. And that can be just so helpful. You're just disabusing them of the pressure they're putting themselves on. And, if that's not our work, I don't know what is, Ken.
Oh, yeah. Well said, Rory. Here, I say. Another area of this model, I guess, that is interesting to me is the bargaining stage. That if I didn't do that, if it had gone like this, if I only listened to, if I'd have read that, if we'd have taken these, or whatever that bargaining may be. And we may recognize that a client can get stuck there even many years after the loss, that it's a sticky place, the bargaining. It's almost that there can be an accepting of, if I had acted differently, then this may have played out very, very differently. And that, I think, is when we recognize that a client may be in that bargaining phase and being in that bargaining phase for some time. I think there's the patience element of being with them within that. And within the bargaining, there is an incongruence. And the incongruence for me, I'm speaking specifically about loss now. So I'll speak about the loss of the car. If I hadn't parked it over there, if I had bought that alarm system, if I'd have put a steering lock on, then this wouldn't have happened. But the truth of the matter is, it did happen. So there is an incongruence in looking back to, it may not have happened. And maybe in a person-centered way, you can point to the incongruence when the time is right, when the relationship is built up right, saying, I recognize that you really feel that if you'd have done those things in the past differently, then maybe it would have played out differently. But of course, you now find yourself here, and pointing again to how it really is, what it's like right now, bringing them into the here and now, but recognizing the emotions of the there and then, the bargaining, if I had, if I hadn't, if we had, whatever that may be. That's a sticky place to be, and I think patience there, Rory, is just patience and understanding, care and empathy.
I totally agree, and also, don't be surprised if this kind of presentation of grief comes up many years after someone has died, because it can be kind of cyclic. That's the word I'm looking for. It can be cyclic. So things like on anniversaries, things like on birthdays, Christmas holidays, as we call them now, all those things can trigger that kind of cycle, and it can trigger individual bits of the DABDA cycle. So you might get a client you're working with, and all of a sudden they come in just incredibly angry one day, and you say, I noticed that you seem really angry, and it might be that that is the symptom, if you like, of the fact that there's a special day. It could be a birthday, it could be a holiday. That person isn't there, and they're just very angry about it, that they've left them. And and in fact, thinking back through practice, Ken, I can think of a number of occasions where I've worked with clients and they're angry the person actually died.
Yeah,
they're angry the person actually died, and it's real anger. And as Ken has often said, and I love Ken's phrase, all feelings are welcome in the therapy room. All feelings should be engaged with. And, maybe you have to engage with that. It feels a little bit counterintuitive that you are angry at someone dying, but actually that's the process, part of the process of letting go. And for some people, it can be a lifelong endeavor. Some people kind of move on and they move away. Other people may very well just have this cyclic revisiting of the difficulties and the pain of loss, and others may, quite frankly, not escape it at all. That might be a permanent position for them.
Yeah, you can definitely get stuck there. And I think to circle right back to where we began with this, before we give you the special secret link to go and get Rory's super duper handout on the DABDA model, then you can have it in your hand and you can look over that yourself. And that is that this is not linear, and that it can go forward and backwards. So you can have an example where a client will have acceptance that the person is gone. And I'm speaking from my own personal journey here, looking back over the Christmas period. I lost my dad over that time. And every time we come to that time of year, I maybe feel myself getting slightly depressed, revisiting that depression stage of things, even though I have the acceptance, and I've had the acceptance now for decades, but I still go back there at this time of year. And you mentioned it there, Rory, the little triggers that might be there. It might be a birthday, it might be an anniversary, it might be a festive holiday where you might think back on that person, and you can very much move from acceptance to another stage. It's a good model. It's worth having. It's not the be all and end all, and I wouldn't suggest, if you are working with grief, that this is your only model that you would work with. I would expand your horizons on that, but it's certainly worth having. As you said, Rory, simple to understand, simple to teach somebody else. The DABDA model, Elisabeth Kübler-Ross. Where can you get it? Go to counsellingtutor.com. That's our mother website. Click on the podcast tab, because that's what you're listening to. Find episode 249 right there on that page. You can download Rory's super duper handout.
It's a super duper handout.
It's right there for you, and there it is. Theory to Practice is proudly sponsored by CounsellingSkillsAcademy.com. I'm Ken Kelly, and I've got a real burning passion for counselling skills. I've built training that takes the doubt out of using counselling skills. You get to see the counselling skills used in real live sessions by a qualified therapist. Full sessions, real material, real counselling skills. To find out more, go to CounsellingSkillsAcademy.com. That is today's Theory in Practice. And we now move into our new section, which is called Practice Today. So just before we go into what we're going to be talking about today in Practice Today, which is using translators in the therapy room, just give us a flavour of what we can expect, Rory, in Practice Today as we go forward. What's going to sit in this little section?
Well, thank you, Ken. Yes, in this section, we're going to be talking about contemporary issues that therapists have to deal with, maybe things that they're not trained for in their first trainings or even in their CPD. And this is going to be more of a practical section where we look at issues that come up and, inspect and observe them from different angles. So if it happens to someone who's listened to this, we're going to be looking at translators today, people who are listening have got a better idea of what actions they may take and how they may engage with it. So it's a kind of modern take on things that happen in therapy that sometimes we just don't train for or never even think about.
I like that. And of course, as we shouted out at the beginning of this episode, we'd love your input in this. We want to know what you want to hear us discuss in this section. And where can they let us know, Rory? Which Facebook group should they go to?
Let me think, Ken. Well, if you go to Facebook and type in Counselling Tutor, you'll find us. We're a very welcoming site. Our moderators will let you in. You can join thousands and thousands of like-minded people. We have students, we have qualified colleagues, we have supervisors, we have a soup song of tutors, and they're all talking about current topics in the world of counselling and psychotherapy. So join the party, come on in. We want to see you, we want to make you welcome, and ask your question. If you've got a question that you want answering, just type in "practice matters" into the comment, and this is what you want us to discuss, and if we can, we'll try and discuss it in this section of the podcast.
I was looking in our very Facebook group this morning, Rory, in preparation for our chat today, and I put in translator to see what came up, and there's many discussions on having a translator in the room, including some nice links to websites and one particular article that I was looking at working where there's a suggestion that hard of hearing people also need counselling, and British Sign Language, it was written in the UK, is saying, we need British Sign Language either to be taught to counsellors, or you need someone to interpret for the person.
Yeah. I mean, that's a very interesting point, Ken. British Sign Language.
Yeah.
Because it is, the clue is in the name, it's British. What happens if you get a client who's been taught sign language from a different country or a different model of sign language? And the whole thing about translation was generated by a conversation I had with a colleague who wrote to me about 6 or 8 months ago. I'd attended our online and telephone counselling course and said, how do you use, what happens if you got someone from another country who doesn't speak English, or I can't speak their language? And I suggested a few things, and she wrote back to me on her experience of using translators. So there's 2 ways of translation. You can actually get somebody who is a translator. So I think we'll start there, Ken. And who do you get? And I'll tell you who you don't get to be a translator. You don't get a family member to be a translator.
Yeah.
Because what can happen is there may be some inhibition with the client. If you've got someone who's talking about very intimate issues and they're using their child as a translator, they're not going to want to talk about that in front of their child. And also, it may be that, if you're using a family member, the family member may not want the information spoken to the therapist, so they may not actually translate correctly. There was an interesting article on a court case where they had a translator in the court case, and the trial had to be stopped because one of the people in the public gallery was actually a native speaker listening to a witness and said, that's not what they said. The translator had, either, because of the way translation is, sometimes there's different forms of language, isn't there? And it can be translated in different ways, or it was done deliberately. I mean, I've no evidence it was done deliberately. However, it just shows how important translation is. And not to put too fine a point on it, those who are working in services are now seeing people who are not native English speakers, or English isn't their first language, and they need a service too. We've got, refugees, we've got people coming from war zones who speak many different languages. And, I think modern therapists, this is about contemporary practice, we're going to have to think about how we're going to serve those clients, and language is an important part of therapy. It's everything in therapy, Ken.
Yeah. And I mean, there's the third person in the room. I'm going to call it the third person in the room, in that you have another soul in the room with you, somebody else that is not related to this journey that this client is going on, that is listening to the information the client is giving, and then putting that over how they understand it from their frame of reference. And I think what you're referring to in the court case, I don't know how that played out or what was going on there, but it's so easy, isn't it? And I remember one of the exercises we did in college when I was training under you on frame of reference was you would ask 3 people to look out of the window and write down what they saw. And everybody wrote down something different. Why? We're looking through the same window at the same picture, but we all have a different frame of reference of that attracts us. And if you look to books that are translated, there's sometimes, it's not the same. When you translate it out of Sanskrit, there aren't the right words to put into blah, 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 blah. So we have to recognize that there may be a break in the narrative. But I think what we can do when we're working with a translator is we can pay very close attention to body language and the non-verbal communication that may be coming from that client. We can see the emotion and maybe feel the emotion that they may convey in how they put that information over, because at the end of the day, we're there with them in that emotion. Yes, we need to know the narrative, but that emotion is vitally important. But yes, you've got a third person in the room, but you've also maybe got another frame of reference to watch out for.
Absolutely, and we'd probably do another contemporary practice discussion on how culturally people express things like grief, sadness, because people express them in different ways through different cultures, and of course, our whole conversation has been predicated, Ken, on the fact that we're actually getting a person in to do the translation, and that isn't always the case. Translators are expensive. You have to book them; don't always turn up. And the person who wrote to me used some translation software. And what I want to do is just share some observations that she shared with me about the positives and slightly downsides of using translation software. So for those of you who are thinking, well, what's translation software? If you Google Translate, you'll find that you can type English text in, and on the box on the right-hand side, you get whatever language you want that comes out of it. So, English to French, French to English, German. It's quite a sophisticated thing, quite a thing to see. And that's the first place we'll go, because the person who wrote to me said that they tried Google Translate, client writes down the issue, translates into English, and then you write down in your language what your response is, and it translates into their language. Presumption of literacy. And that's the first hurdle that this person came across, because the people she was dealing with had been effectively kidnapped. They hadn't been educated. They're predominantly women. They hadn't been educated. They couldn't speak their own language because, part of the control was not giving people access to education. So that fell a little bit at the first hurdle, because if someone can't write, they can't use a translator. So that's the first thing to think about. And the other thing was that, so don't assume the client can read or write. Using technology takes practice. So if you're using technology, you need to practice, and that means practicing with someone who is who's writing in a different language. That can be a bit tricky. Yeah. And also, the software might not actually be an accurate translation. That's the first thing, Ken.
Yeah.
So, that's so useful. And also, she talked about the kind of technology that they use. They got some tablets initially, and the tablets weren't very fast. They didn't connect to the internet. They connected to the internet, but their processing speed wasn't fast. But, and I'm paraphrasing this, it became a lot better when they used phones. And it struck me, Ken, that phones actually are probably meant for this because people carry them around, they're very compact. There's been a lot of effort put into translation software. If you go on the App Store or the Google Market where you buy your apps, there's huge amounts of translation software that can be downloaded onto a phone that sometimes you can't download onto a computer because the phone is a very handy thing. So there is a lot to think about.
Yeah.
And I think finally, Ken, if you're working in a busy practice in a city, what's the policy on translation? Is there a policy? I can remember many years ago when I was working for a charity just down the road from where I lived, and I was the chair of it. I was the chair, and someone phoned up and said, "We've got a lot of people speaking French. We think they're speaking French in our reception, and they're getting very upset." And someone had tried to engage them in A-level holiday French, and that hadn't gone down too well. And eventually, we got an interpreter in, and it took some sorting out to be able to get the people who needed the help to the translator, and we had to get a budget for that. So it's a big thing, but we are becoming a more diverse society in terms of language. I was out and about yesterday locally. I live in quite a small part of the world, and I had at least 2 languages being spoken that weren't English.
Yeah.
And they were people who lived in my area. They're my neighbours. They're my neighbours. Now, they may very well speak English as a first language, but who knows?
Yeah, it's a very, very interesting topic. And I think as technology grows, as we do more work online, there are more maybe opportunities to work across cultures, across language barriers. I think I have a colleague who is a polyglot, and she worked as an interpreter for many, many years. She now teaches languages. She's doing a lot of work with refugees. And from her experience, if you're looking for a translator, you're maybe best looking at professional translator services where you can hire somebody where they have a code of conduct, where they will understand about confidentialities, because of course interpreters are used in sensitive situations all the time, in governmental meetings with foreign dignitaries. There will be a translator there, so it is not, it's not too unusual, but it does carry with it an expense. It can sometimes be quite a considerable expense. I think it's something to weigh up and have a think about of, is that for you within your practice? And I wouldn't want to leave this topic without putting out a disclaimer. When we are speaking about things like Google Translate and apps that can be used for translation, we are in no way suggesting that you use any of these apps. It is that the sad thing is that so often the information that you might be putting into that app, which is maybe not yours to put in, maybe the client, you're getting a client to type in what they're feeling, they're sharing their deepest secrets. How is that being protected? Who owns that data? Where is that data being stored? Who looks at that data? That all comes way before the convenience of these apps. They can look so shiny and so easy. And of course, if you're out on holiday in a country and you just need to get by and find a restaurant, then they're great for that. But think really carefully when putting sensitive data into any application. Look first and foremostly at how that data is protected and managed. Wow, I don't think we'd reach the end of this topic if we spoke for another hour, Rory. It's deep.
We'd get another hour to it easily, couldn't we?
Join that conversation. This is our new section. It's called Practice Today. What's happening in practice today? Today we spoke about translation in the therapy room. Weigh in. Tell us your thoughts. Facebook, put into Counselling Tutor. Join that conversation. We now move on to Practice Matters. This is the CPD section of the Counselling Tutor podcast. And you can put this down as CPD, on your CPD, what do you call it? Where you record your audit. Yeah, your sheet. I'm looking for the big words. Your CPD audit you can put in listening to the Counselling Tutor podcast as part of that CPD. Anything that you do in service of your client or your practice as a counsellor can be classed as CPD. So put that down. And today we're going to hear from Allan Frater. You spoke with him, Rory, and he spoke about waking dreams.
Yes, Allan has written a book which we will allude to, and you'll be able to see the link to that in the show notes on podcast 249. But yes, he talks about waking dreams, the hinterland between our kind of day-to-day experience and also our fantasy experience. It's a really interesting piece of thinking, and I caught up with Allan Frater, and this is what he had to say about it.
Practice matters.
The National Counselling Society is proud to sponsor Practice Matters. National Counselling Society are really excited to have launched their Children and Young People Therapist Register for counsellors working with the younger age group. To find out more, visit nationalcounselingsociety.org. nationalcounselingsociety.org.
And we welcome Allan Frater, who's written a book entitled Waking Dreams, Imagination in Psychotherapy and Everyday Life. So first of all, Allan, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me along, Rory. Nice to be here.
So waking dreams in psychotherapy. So I guess the first question is, what are waking dreams?
It's what it says on the tin. So it's like a mixture of waking and dreaming. So a waking dream, the easiest way to, well, maybe from experience, your audience, I would imagine a lot of them will have had the experience of waking up in the morning and you're still in a dreamscape, but you know you're in your bed. That happens spontaneously sometimes. A waking dream is therefore an overlap of an imagined reality, the dreamscape, with being in the normal physical world. And a waking dream practice is about learning the conditions to create that in-between state and explore it with the client.
So would this be working with subconscious processes, is my question. I guess we work, therapists tend to work in here now, working with waking dreams. Is there a connection to subconscious process here?
Well, I guess it just depends what you mean by subconscious. But what I'm interested in, well, it gives us the opportunity to work with the spontaneously arising imagery that's there in the psyche, in the unconscious, in the subconscious. So that's the emphasis in the book, is on how to notice, validate, enhance, explore, because that spontaneously arising imagery is psychologically relevant. So it's not like, there's a lot of like active imagination or guided imagery books that give scripts to take people on a journey up a mountain or whatever. That's not so much what I'm interested in. What waking dreams allow us to do is enter into and participate in the imagery that's there already.
Yeah, so the in a co-created relationship, the therapist can explore the meanings with the client. I guess that's the thrust of it, is it?
It's explore the meaningfulness is how I put it. So in terms of therapy, how I see it is that the raw datum, if you like, is images. I mean, I would say that because I consider myself to be a sort of image-centric practitioner. So, you get body-centered people or people who are interested in cognitive emphasis. But for me, memories are images. And we spend a lot of time talking about memories. Future fantasies, the worry about next week or whatever, that's an imagined reality that overlaps with the physical reality of the consulting room. And similarly, the transference, how the client or patient sees the therapist, the story that they tell about us, or indeed how they interact in the room with a teddy bear or a drawing or a painting or whatever, that's images too. So the waking dream practice allows us to land that and enter into an exploration of it, not to figure out what it means so much, I'm more interested in an experiential process which is meaningful. We can figure out what it means afterwards if we want to. Like when you wake up from a dream and you wonder what it means, it's kind of like a knee-jerk reaction to waking up in the morning. But what's exciting for me about waking dream practice is it gives us an opportunity to enter into the dreamscape, if you like, or the memory or the future fantasy, or to work in the moment in the room in an embodied experiential way with the imagery, and to hang loose to trying to figure it out, because that can kind of shut things down. And we turn images into ideas, and the imagining becomes thinking. And that can be a safe place to go. That can be like a comfortable place, an interesting place. But I like to carve out the opportunity to allow the client to inhabit the imagery for a while.
I think it's a really interesting form of practice, and I wonder, are some clients better suited to this type of work than others? I mean, can you, when you engage with a client, can you see that some clients may benefit more, or may have a more meaningful experience in therapy by using waking dream?
I think generally speaking, it's applicable across the board. Now, that might seem a little bit heterodox, because conventionally, working images is contraindicated for perhaps people with overactive imaginations, or people who are a little bit less stable. Because we don't want to, because the fear is that working with images takes them further into a fantasy life. For me, given that we can't get away from images because they are the memories, perceptions, and future fantasies that are happening all the time, for me, it's more about how you work with the images. And I make a distinction between working with them in an eyes closed waking dream, which is the more conventional way. You close your eyes and have a journey or whatever. What I present in the book is also a way to do it with your eyes open. And in that way, the client remains grounded in the room with you. They're not completely disappearing into the wilderness of fantasy life. And we can work with images in a safe way with most people. So yeah, that's. I mean, it can be really helpful for. I mean, some people don't think they're very imaginative, and therefore they might have hang-ups around working in this way. For me, that's about clarifying for myself as a therapist, and also to the client, what we mean by an image. What does it mean to get an image? Most people have an outlandish assumption that it's like to enter into some kind of three-dimensional Walt Disney fantasy where the normal world disappears. But as we defined earlier, a waking dream is you're still in the normal world and you have an imaginal overlap. And that's a subtle sense that everyone can have. You just need to remember what you had for breakfast, and that's an image. So you're still here and you've got an image. So I think clarifying what we mean by an image can get around that. And also the eyes open thing can avoid the self-consciousness that people might have. Sometimes if you get them to do like an experiment, like an eyes closed thing, they get very self-conscious, or they want to do it really, really well, and that gets in the way. But if we do it in an eyes open way, then the therapy doesn't get in the way of the therapy. But I think one last point on that question is, I think particularly for more sort of mentally identified people who are a bit more in their head, who perhaps don't know what they feel or don't really have a lot of body awareness, I think as an opening into experiential work, most mentally identified people can become aware of images. And then that takes us into feelings and bodily sensations, because imagination isn't just visuals. Imagination is like a nexus of all the senses and feelings and thoughts together.
It's a fascinating form of practice. I mean, phenomenology and, as Martin Heidegger just said, I'm quoting from the book, we do not have a body, rather we are bodily. This idea of a lived, almost visceral experience of existence, which I think Heidegger kind of outlined a little bit more than Husserl. If my research and my studies are correct, gives us this sense of a literally a lived experience. But this seems to be more about expanding that lived experience to encompass. And when I talked earlier about subconscious, that may not be in awareness was what I was referring to. So I guess to modify my question is to ask, does this bring up things that were not in awareness that the client can take away and inspect in their own time?
Yeah, I think I understand. I think if we think of a spectrum from fantasy to an ever-increasing imaginal accuracy or sensibility, so we can think of like a client's presents an issue as them being stuck in a habitual story about who they are and the world around them and what they expect from that world. So that's the first thing, to find out what story, which is to say the images, the imaginal narrative that people are caught up in. That will be reflected in the imagery in waking dream practice. It's kind of remarkable, but you won't. But if your waking dream has a dragon in a cave or something, to cartoon it a little bit, obviously when you open your eyes, you won't find a dragon at the end of the garden behind the shed. But there will be dragon-like people and cave-like places in your actual life. It's kind of like a condensed form of the activity of images that we're participating in. It's not random. So it reflects the current identity, if you like. And then the beauty is, I talk about novel images. It's like somewhere in the waking dream, there will be a standout image. There'll be something that interrupts or impinges upon that habitual story. And the waking dream practice is all about allowing an opening to explore that new possibility. So it's kind of like if the habitual story is like repetitive and a state of suffering, it's like we're looking for a crack in the story fabric of everyday life and helping people to enter into a new story and to participate with a wider field of images, which is to say relationships, activities, places, ways of being, sense of belonging. And so, I mean, that's why we're doing it, right? You're trying to help people reimagine their sense of self and the world.
Yes, and I think it speaks to life script in general, that, doesn't it? If you think of the TA view of life script, that we repeat patterns of behaviour, to be able to have a window of another opportunity to see how our life may be or could be, then that's a wonderful thing, isn't it? And I guess the whole point of therapy. So I guess my final question on this fascinating subject, that we could have a good hour on this. We could, is if someone's really interested in this type of work and this type of encounter with clients, where would they go to find out more information? Is there training around this, or is this something that which one develops as a practitioner through inquiry and reflection?
The simplest thing to do would be to read my book, which is called Waking Dreams, Imagination in Psychotherapy and Everyday Life. I've got a website called wildimagination.uk, which has lots of free stuff on it and videos. So it fleshes out what we've just spoken about. You can read the beginning of the book on the website, wildimagination.uk. I also run a course based on the book, an online course. Beyond that, it's a bit niche where I'm coming from. I mean, other sources are Robert Bosnak. He's a Jungian dream worker. James Hillman. Revisioning Psychology, classic text. Stephen K. Levine, he's a wonderful art therapist. So there's stuff out there. But if you go to my website, there's resources and links and reading lists and videos you could try there.
Sure. Well, we'll put those links into the show notes of the podcast. I've started to read the book, and I'm starting to get quite enamored with the idea of waking dreams and that borderline between kind of reality and that kind of embodied experience of who we may be. So I've got a free copy of the book. Complete transparency here. I got a free copy of the book. Free books, always great. So I am genuinely enjoying the opening chapters. So with that said, Allan Frater, thank you so much for joining us.
Big thank you to Allan. A big thank you to you, Rory, for reaching out and holding that really interesting interview. It's I'd like to read the book. I haven't read the book. I would like to read the book. I'll certainly be looking at the show notes page, counsellingtutor.com, podcast tab, episode 249, to have a look for the link to the book. That is Allan Frater on the topic of waking dreams. And I do believe, Rory, there's a bit of a rumour here. I'm going to have to go for you for confirmation on this rumour that Allan may be in the pipeline for making a lecture for the Counsellor CPD Library. So that's worth looking out for.
Absolutely. We were so impressed with what he had to say that we invited him to do a lecture, and he's going to be scheduled in as one of our lecturers. And having started to read the book, I don't think this is a lecture to be missed once we produce it, Ken.
Nice one. And if you're not a member of the Counsellor CPD Library, it's so easy to join. You just go to counsellingtutor.com and the information is right there on the screen. An annual membership to the Counsellor CPD Library will cost you less than the price of 1 cup of coffee per month out with a friend. So it really is worth it. It's absolutely jam-packed full of quality CPD, all with learning objectives, all certified. So go and check that out at counsellingtutor.com. This has been episode 249 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast.
Yes, we started with theory and practice, stages of grieving. We looked at the work of Elisabeth Kübler-Ross, the enduring piece of theory that has helped so many. And we looked at it in a little bit more detail and hope that is of help to you if you ever need to use that theory with your clients. Practice today is a new section. We're looking at contemporary issues in counselling, and Ken and myself talked about using translators in the therapy room, something that really is a contemporary issue in the society that we find ourselves in. And then finally, in Practice Matters, I caught up with Allan Frater, who talked about waking dreams in psychotherapy, an interesting direction taken in a new idea of how people interact with the world. And as always, stay grounded and stay safe.
If you're a qualified counsellor or psychotherapist, then why not check out the Counsellor CPD Library? Stay current with your CPD requirements with over 150 hours of academically rigorous, on-demand lectures you can stream to your device. Joining Counselor CPD will expand your skill set to create a more specialised, highly rewarding practice. For more information on the Counselor CPD Library, visit counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.